Welcome to Hebrews chapter 11. This chapter is widely referred to as the faith chapter, and rightly so. Chapter 10 ends with both a warning and a word of encouragement. The encouragement specifically referred to those who have faith in contrast to those who shrink back. And here in this chapter, in 11, we get to look into those who have great faith. It's basically a long list of faith's Hall of Famers. Every name in here has the Heisman Trophy on their mantle, Super Bowl rings on their fingers. I mean, we're talking about some of the greatest leaders in the Bible: Noah, Abraham, Joseph, Moses, and more. These guys, their faith was so insane that it changed history, and they were used by God in incredible ways. They had great faith that led them to great victories, like Noah, and faith that led to great patience, like Moses, or great suffering, like Joseph. And others in this list had great obedience and faith in great sacrifice. These guys are all compiled right here to showcase their incredible faith. And here in this passage, it's actually neat. From the very beginning, the writer gives us a direct definition of what faith is. If you struggle with defining faith before, then buckle up, because the Bible is about to define it for you. Let's look at the very first verse of Hebrews 11. It says this: "Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen." Two words to describe faith are assurance and conviction. It's the assurance that God is who He says He is, and the conviction that God will do what He says He will do. It's believing that God is sovereign and loves us dearly, and that He will fulfill His promises even when we don't see those promises materializing. Faith isn't blind, weak, gullible, or senseless. It's the assurance that God is and the conviction that God will do. Then the writer of Hebrews starts this great list of these great men of faith, our Hall of Famers. But as he goes through this list, there's something interesting about the way that he starts. I would have started with like Joseph, or maybe I would have started with Abraham. But inspired by the Holy Spirit, the writer starts with two different people. And his choice of these two different people needs to be examined. So let's go ahead and read what are the first two people that the writer of Hebrews starts with. We're going to move right to verses 4 and 5. "By faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he was attested to by righteousness, God testifying about his gifts, and though he is dead, he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. But before he was taken up, he was attested to have been pleasing to God." Our first two people, Abel and Enoch. Most of us don't even know who Enoch is. And I don't mean any disrespect here, but as you read through the Old Testament, these are not the type of men that would ordinarily catch your eye. Abel made a sacrifice to God and then was beaten to death by his brother Cain. We know the story. And Enoch walked with God, and he was no more because God took him away. In the book of Genesis, these two men take up a grand total of less than 10 verses. And by contrast, Noah, the next person mentioned in this chapter, gets 4 chapters. Abraham gets 14 chapters, and Moses gets 4 whole books. So why would God choose these two men to kick off His parade of faith? Why not jump to the better-known heroes and forget about these two? Why did God do that? Well, here's the deal. Nothing finds its way into the Bible by accident. Everything is carefully chosen and inspired by God. And I believe that God chose to start this list with these two guys because, are you ready? They were ordinary. The truth is, it's really hard to relate with Moses or Joseph. They were of the mightiest and greatest men to ever live. And I don't wake up in the morning thinking, "Hey, Neil, you're just like King David." Most of us think of ourselves as ordinary people, nowhere as impressive as Noah, Abraham, or Moses. Those were great men. They did great deeds that changed the course of human history, and likely we're not going to be like them. I believe that God used Abel and Enoch as His first example precisely because they were ordinary men and women, or no, not women, ordinary men who are not known for their great deeds. Instead, what made them distinctive listen, is that everything they did, they focused on pleasing God. Abel, out of his abundance of his own heart, he gave his very best. There was a passionate response inside of him to give his best to God. And you know, what we give our best to is what we care about the most. And his passion for God dictated his life. And here's the cool thing, I can strive to be like Abel. Enoch, you know what, let's go ahead and read Enoch because most of us don't know who he is. Genesis 5 verses 22 and through 24 says this, then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he fathered Methuselah, and he fathered other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him up. He walked with God for 365 years. And it's important to understand that the word walk there, it actually means a continual walk or more and more. How many of you know someone who's followed God for 365 years? And then here's the cool thing, God took him to heaven without death. He was just no more. That's how I want to go. Beam me up, Scotty. What was it? Here's the truth about these two. I believe the lesson here is this, that God is not necessarily impressed with mighty deeds of faith. He's impressed by common men and women who every day have one thought in their mind. I want to please God in all that I do and all that I say today. And I love this passage because though I cannot relate with Moses, Abraham, or Noah, I can and you can relate with Abel and Enoch. The secret to walking with them in the miraculous power of God is to turn our hearts towards him. He's been talking about transplanting hearts all of history, and you can read about that everywhere in the Bible. But maybe we need to be reminded today that that means more than just having our hearts given to him through salvation. God desires our hearts to be turned towards him, to be focused on him. And this has always been his desire. He wants our desires to become his desires. And I want to read you one of my favorite passages in the Bible, Psalms 37, 4 and 5. It says this, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do it. It's not God's desires that change and become ours, but instead our desires that change and become his. It's exciting that when we exchange these what excites our hearts for what excites his. It's our dreams that change to become his dreams, and our focuses that morph into his focus. And even though we may not be able to relate with Moses or Abraham, God gave us two guys that we can relate to and that definitely challenge us, Abel and Enoch. Their everyday passion and focus on God is something that we can attain to. Let this chapter be an encouragement to you today. Like I said earlier, God is not necessarily impressed by mighty deeds of faith. He's impressed by common men and women who every day have one thought in their mind. I want to please God in all that I do and all that I say today, and I want to put my faith in him. I hope that this was an encouragement to you and you enjoyed this chapter as much as I did.